Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about everything we know so far about the Path of Exile 2 passive skill tree. Now, the early access releases in 7 days from now, and until then, I've been occupying myself with quite a bit of videos that have been posted by other creators. But this build, notably Dreamcore, who's done a great job of basically just covering all the passive skill notables, or a ton of them anyways, and kind of drip feeding us over the last few days. I see what you're doing. But yeah, it's been absolutely great. Whereas other people have just been recording gameplay, he's basically been saying, no, I know what you actually want. You want to know what the passive tree looks like, so I highly appreciate that. But Jira has been putting out quite a bit, especially on the bottom of the passive tree. And we've also had bits and pieces from like Ziggy D, official reveals, and so on. And we've seen a lot of bits and pieces of certain notables, but never really all put together in a theme. For example, all the ES nodes or all the poison nodes and whatnot. And that's what I kind of wanted to do with this video, because it's one thing to see bits and pieces, but kind of getting the full picture. Also, sometimes what's not on the passive tree actually tells you more about it than what is on there. And I'll obviously give my opinion in terms of what I think this means for build making and for the game as a whole. If you're just here to literally look at all notables on your own, my editor for this video actually made a Imgur with all the notables, so the link will be down below in the description and you can just take that. But if passive skills are not really your thing and you want IRL skills, then you might want to check out today's sponsor, Boot.dev.
Boot.dev is an online learning platform that teaches you backend development. Their selling proposition is learning stuff in more of a gamified version to make the process more enjoyable. This means you're more engaged with the topic and stop getting bored easily. They'll teach you backend development from start to finish in the Python and Go programming languages. Programmers have amazing earning potential. In fact, the median salary for backend development in the US in 2023 was over $100,000. The platform is designed to get you to your keyboard and start coding. These kind of projects are the only way to actually learn and get experience in the field. You can earn XP, levels, achievements, and complete quests, while also possibly getting a spot on the leaderboards. There's also a 30-day, no questions asked refund policy and tons of free demos you can check out on the website before you even spend your first dollar. So if you're interested, use code Palsteron for 25% off your first purchase. That is either your first month or a year, whatever you prefer. Link will be down below in the description. But with that being said, let's get back to our passive skills. Now, this picture and a lot of other information are over on PoE2DB. I will link that down in the description as well in case you're interested. But as you can see, the tree actually looks even bigger than in PoE1. It's a little bit deceptive though, because everything is a little bit more spaced out. It's also a lot prettier. A lot of these have certain themes. Like for example, this looks like a shield, right? Down below, you have stuff that looks like a spear, stuff that looks like a crossbow, right? You have the spear here. It is just incredibly pretty. But okay, let's get into the nitty gritty. The biggest thing that changed on the passive tree is not a single node. It is what you see right here. These pathing nodes that used to be basically 10 intelligence on the top, 10 strength on the bottom. It depends on where you are in the passive tree. They're now +5 to any attribute of your choosing. So that means you can start as a witch and just take strength after strength after strength. This means you can do stuff like, I don't know, play a Gemling Legionnaire on the bottom, be a mercenary, and just take all int nodes and path all the way to the top and get mind over matter and be a mana stacker. That is ridiculous, especially when it comes to flexibility of your attributes, especially because we do not know how much attributes you actually get on your gear. So for all we know, this is probably the biggest game changer. Big one as well. Jewel sockets are now traveling nodes. So as you can see here, right, it's just attributes, oh, a jewel socket. In Path of Exile 1, you actually have to invest to get jewels. So for example, this is a pathing node. This one you have to opt in for 2 points. That is not the case anymore. In Path of Exile 2, one of these random traveling nodes would actually be a jewel. So that means that pathing might not be as obvious as you might think. So for example, you could path out here and it's only like 2-3 points, but maybe going through the other side in a particular way is more interesting, because this one node here is worth like, I don't know, it can be worth up to 5 to 8 attributes as far as we know. So yeah, we don't know exactly how strong jewels are because we don't have the full table, but this is very promising and it will make everything a little bit more complicated. Another big deal, as you might see here, there's no more masteries. If you guys haven't played Path of Exile 1, this is what masteries are. Let's say I take this notable right here. This is a bow cluster, and in the middle there is a bow mastery. There's usually very strong effects in the middle that you can take for 1 point once you've allocated a notable. This makes it a lot more flexible to take the same masteries no matter where you are on the tree. So for example, if I took a bow mastery up top here,
I would have these same options and I would not have to go all the way down. That is now gone, and I think that's good riddance because it is a lot easier to path around on the tree now. The traveling nodes are a lot less, and they can now be a lot more flexible with whatever attribute you need. So I don't think we're gonna miss it. Another thing I noticed is that there are a lot more specific notables on the passive tree, whereas the PoE1 tree is known for a lot of just general buffs, with a few outliers, of course. This tree seems a lot more specialized. There are a lot more nodes that might be really good on 1 or 2 builds, but then utterly useless on others. And the last difference to Path of Exile 1 that I want to point out is how many traveling nodes it takes to get to some of these notables. And this is important to note because your notables are usually the payoffs. Now you're going to say, oh, notables on average seem stronger than the Path of Exile 1. But you have to remember that some of these take like 5 pathing nodes until you get to the notable. That is kind of unheard of in Path of Exile 1, where most of these clusters take 3 or at most 4. So in general, a lot of these notables will be judged off of how good the small nodes are, and we don't have too much information on it because most creators only focused on the big nodes when the small nodes are actually also quite important. So you have to kind of take it as a package. As an example, there's some really OP nodes down here for like 4 points or whatever, and if the small nodes are bad though, all of a sudden the notable kind of looks bad as well. And at this point, I also want to note that a lot of these notables will look good in a vacuum, but might never get picked simply because they are on an inconvenient spot on the passive tree. Think about, I don't know, like a certain pathway is really strong. It has a lot of good nodes on the way. Like let's, for example, say you want to path out here, you want to path here, over here, and there's something like there's like a node cluster down here. It has really good nodes, but pathing all the way down here would be crazy, and there's nothing really on the way. Just as an example, then this node can be as good as it wants to be. You're never going to pick it. So do keep that in mind when we're going to talk about these in a vacuum. Now, let's start with the spicy stuff. Life and mana on the passive tree. A lot of people are planning out their mind over matter builds right now, their melee builds, and one of the things that everybody already noticed is there's almost no life on the passive skill tree. We have seen Unbending so far, which gives a massive 3%. And then there's also another node that I actually did not include here because I couldn't find it again. It gives 3% life, mana, and energy shield. But those two together are kind of all we know about life. And when it comes to mana, there's not that much more. There's another node, which we're going to go over on the energy shield one, that gives another 5% mana. But percentage-wise, we're going to rely a lot on probably unique gear. Now, to contrast this with energy shield, if you look at this, these numbers, they range from like 25 to 60%. Some of them have downsides. Some of them actually come with additional upsides. We know a lot of the small energy shield nodes are 15% per point. And we also know from the Path of Exile 2 website that the bases are going to be quite similar to what they were in Path of Exile 1. So for example, body armors are probably going to have 600 plus, right? Helmets are going to have 300 plus and all that. So I'm not really sure how they're planning to balance this, because are they going to balance around life? Or are they going to balance around energy shield? Because the difference is probably going to be 4,000 life versus like, I don't know, 15,000 energy shield. Palsteron from the future here. Eldritch Battery has just confirmed to be removed from early access. They will have to re-evaluate it because it's currently too strong. Converts all energy shield to mana. So I'm just, yeah, adding this here just so you know and you're not surprised. But I guess if you think about what ES's downsides actually are, there is 3 things in particular. The first one is you actually need to mitigate stun. Stun threshold depends on your life. Energy shield doesn't do anything there, so you need to introduce mods like this. Percentage of maximum ES as additional stun threshold. So for example, if you have 10,000 energy shield, 20% of that, so you get 2,000 stun threshold. Whereas on the life build, that would look a little bit different. A huge one that I haven't heard enough people talk about is the ailment threshold stuff. And we haven't even seen much yet. There is one node we're going to talk about later that has it. But in general, ailments are usually an absolute pest for ES-based builds because, once again, it depends on your life threshold. And if you don't have any life, then you're just going to get frozen over and over. And as far as we know, other than charms, there won't really be much to mitigate that whatsoever. And charms are not going to be permanent. You're not going to have just freeze immune all the time. So you're going to have to kind of, I don't know, gear into that. We just do not know. Another important thing to point out is you're going to lose all your base types, which means in order to get your energy shield up, you're going to have to gear fully into it. That is an opportunity cost. You're going to lose either evasion or armor that you could have had instead. So comparing life and energy shield 1-to-1 is obviously not fair because the life build could have full armor gear here. So a lot of life's success will probably depend on how strong armor or evasion are. And to state the obvious here at the end, just because you have a lot of points to invest into doesn't mean that that's just an upside purely, because you only have so many points on the passive tree, and whereas life nodes might have some kind of way to get back some of the defense with different nodes, and it has an extra 40 nodes, you're gonna invest all of this into stun threshold, energy shield, faster start of energy shield, and whatnot. And that's the perfect segue to talk about recharge, because recharge for energy shield in Path of Exile 2, just so you see this node as well, is going to be 4 seconds baseline. That is 2 seconds in Path of Exile 1, so that is a big shift. So it either says you invest into it, you somehow cheese it, or you're gonna have a problem. In case you don't know, in order to get your energy shield back, you need to wait and not get hit for a certain amount of seconds. In this, on default, 4 seconds, and you can make that faster with certain notables. But if you get hit in the meantime, the timer is back to 0. You can have as much maximum life as you want. If you don't have the recovery figured out, you're never going to be able to use it all. However, they also give you a lot more tools to counteract that with stuff like faster start of energy shield recharge. If you, for example, have a 100% faster start, you go from 4 seconds to 2 seconds, which would be where it was before, which is quite strong. However, I want to note that if you're a melee build, you're going to have a rough time on energy shield unless you have some other alternative way to recharge your energy shield, because you're going to get hit a lot more. The obvious way to get hit less so your recharge can come back up are block and evasion, although we don't know 100% how easy it is going to be to get that. But if we look at these nodes, one stands out as a very interesting one. Refocus. Increased energy shield recharge rate, cool. Chance for energy shield recharge to just start when you use a skill. Now, I might be overrating this, but this, in my opinion, is the craziest thing I've seen so far when it comes to cheesing recharge rate, because you can basically skip a lot of these points, which takes so much investment. And there is obviously the normal way to use it, which would just be, well, you're casting a lot anyways, you have a lot of cast speed or a lot of attack speed, and you're just naturally getting back your energy shield. One thing to note is there is no way to make it so energy shield can't be stopped. So if you start it and then you get hit again, it's probably going to stop again, unless there's some kind of unique item. There is a few supports and stuff like that, but it's not that important. In general, you're gonna have to kind of have your distance from enemies to make use of energy shield. One weird interaction I wanted to point out with the 10% chance to restart is Flame Blast. They're probably gonna be more channeling skills. I wonder if, for example, if you just wanna real quickly restart your energy shield and you have like a second or something on the side, could you maybe spam Flame Blast, which has a ridiculously low cast time over and over, and it counts as a cast? I'm not really sure, but that might be something you want to throw into your build so you can kind of recover during a boss fight. There's also Covering Ward, which is chance for energy shield recharge to start when you block, which usually only activates when you're in the midst of things. So what could happen is you start it and then immediately you get hit again and it falls off. So I'm not 100% sure about this one. It seems okay, but I'm really going to look forward to Refocus. In general, I'm not 100% sure on what to think here because it seems too obviously good. And I think there will be some stuff that I missed or stuff that we don't know right now that will put energy shield down a peg. Then again, they said they didn't really balance too much for endgame. So maybe that is what they mean. Maybe it's just going to be like every build paths on top and just gets energy shield. I'm not sure at this point. In general, it's going to be a very interesting experiment. Then let's talk about Leech. It's kind of interesting how many Leech nodes we've seen so far, whether it be Mana Leech related, whether it be Life Leech related. We even have Valpact again, right? Life Leech is instant. Wow. You know what's absent, though, from the passive tree, at least as far as we know? Any source of Leech. In fact, the only sources of Leech we've seen so far are physical attack. Let that, like, sink in. We don't have any spell energy shield Leech. We don't have any spell Leech. No elemental Leech. No just elemental attack Leech, anything like that, at least not that we know so far. The only thing we've seen is Vitality Siphon, which is 10% spell damage Leech this life, which you have to go Blood Mage for. And we've seen physical attack damage. That is a support, and it's only like 3 or 2%. That is what we've seen so far. And on weapons, we've also seen mods, but they, as far as I know, are also only physical attack. So what the hell is going on there? I'm not really sure. A lot of people are planning out their monks right now, and I think they might potentially have a Rude Awakening unless they have it actually planned out. And with how much we got revealed from the passive tree, I think there would have been somebody like showing something. I'm pretty sure you're going to get them from uniques, very selective ones that maybe even have a downside. You're going to get them from other ascendancies, and it's going to be extremely scarce to actually get, and that's the way they're going to balance Leech. Because yes, it seems kind of OP to have such efficient Leech support, but is it actually? One thing I want to note is Ghost Reaver is not in the game anymore. No more Life Leech is Energy Shield Leech. Doesn't exist anymore. First up, Vow Pact cannot use Life Flask is actually quite a big deal now because you are forced into a Life Flask. And it's not like you have really good out-of-combat recovery unless you have like a lot of regen. So Vow Pact, while it looks really good, might not even be something you want. And a lot of these things, like for example, Overleech sounds really good. Life Leech effects are not removed when unreserved life is filled. So you go to full life and it keeps leeching. It's kind of like a regen, so to speak. But you got to remember that Leech instances are now only 1 second. That is a big deal. So out of combat Leech, if you have a lot of support, is maybe going to be like 2 seconds. I guess one interesting thing to note, unless I misunderstand this note right here, Life Leech is 20% slower. I don't actually think that's a downside. That's probably going to be an upside, especially if you want to go metabolism, fast metabolism right here, because it actually spreads out the Leech. Maybe I'm wrong and this actually reduces also a little bit of the amount of Leech that you do, but I don't think so. I think it's actually going to make it a lot more cozy. Next up, we have Cooldown, which is something you have not seen, or not much anyways, in Path of Exile 1, especially not on the passive tree. And this is now something that seems readily available, especially in the mercenary area, but also in other places on the tree. And I'm kind of split on this. Cooldown reduction in games is usually something that is either too strong or you don't take it. Usually it's just too strong and you're forced into taking it and pathing around it. So maybe Path of Exile 2 can kind of break that curse. But in general, there's some really interesting notes here. For example, Distracting Presence. Enemies in your presence have 10% reduced CDR. This might, well, make enemies a lot more digestible or maybe even brick them if they are weirdly programmed. Who knows? Skill effect duration on top of 12% and then also AoE down here. So it seems like they really want cooldown recovery to be efficient to take. Plus, we've also seen small CDR nodes which have 5% each. So I'm pretty sure if you want to, you can probably get 50-ish% in total. Then there's new nodes that synergize with grenades and crossbows. The thing I'm a little bit worried about with all of these, they look really good, right? Grenades have +1 proj, +1 cooldown use, and all of that. But the thing I'm worried about is most people who played Mercenaries said it felt really bad early. And then once they got a few levels, it felt a lot better, like level 20, level 30. And I think that has to do with them taking these nodes, which makes me think these nodes are actually, like, everything's obviously balanced around you having this, but if it doesn't feel good before you get them, it's kind of weird that they force you into them, because a lot of these are just huge power spikes. They're not just like, oh, 30% increased damage with swords or like some attack speed. I mean, literally the first cluster bombs you get just doubles the amount of projectiles that you have. Some of these are just absolute no-brainers. Like, so I don't know what to think about these, but they're definitely very strong. And you will have to plan all your build around where they are. So if you're planning to play Mercenary and you don't want to look at some kind of data mine before, or maybe there's not even going to be one, who knows, open your passive tree before you put in points and see where some of these key nodes actually are and go straight to them. Then we have a few interesting melee nodes, mainly Aftershock support, which we have already seen on Ascendancies, but there's even more chance to get an Aftershock. It's basically you slam and then you get another boop afterwards, which can be quite nice, especially since you can apply more hits for more armor break, which is also a new thing, mostly for Fizz builds. And you have stuff like 60% increased damage with fully broken armor. Depending on how hard this is a very efficient node. And then you obviously have Giant's Blood, which I'm still a little bit confused by because it seems too good to be true. I wonder more and more if this attribute requirement is actually a lot more stingy than I give it credit for. But yes, you can dual wield 2 axes or maces or swords, or you can alternatively have one and a shield, which is probably going to be the thing that most people are going to go for. Although we do not currently know what the dual wield bonus is, so maybe. Then we have some minion nodes, which most of the ones that they've shown so far are actually defensive, with like a revive and extra defenses. Reduced reservations, obviously not defensive. They have shown the chance to inflict withered on hit, but it is interesting that they are leaning a little bit more towards defensiveness. Maybe that's just because the good minion damage nodes haven't been revealed yet, but you have to realize that there's no more cluster jewels in the game. That was the biggest source of minion damage that minion builds had in PoE 1. So where is that minion damage going to come from? Are there enough clusters to fill that out? Maybe it's going to come from gear. We don't know yet, but that is something that you potentially should be concerned with. Either way, though, I'm not going to speak on it too much because I'm not a minion expert. Something I am very familiar with, though, is poison. Poison is a weird thing to me. There's actually, by the way, there's another node that I couldn't find that has also can poison enemies an additional time. So we know that poison, per default, has only one stack that you can apply to an enemy. There is another one here and another notable. So we know so far you can get a maximum of 3. There's also support, so you can get 4. You can get Pathfinder and go to 8. So I don't know. So I did some math, and it in theory, I think poison should be really strong, but every single poison playthrough I've seen so far looks dreadful. So I'm not really sure what to think of this, whether it's like the people who played it didn't really know what to do because it is a little bit of a weird change to Path of Exile 1, or whether it's actually not as good as I give it credit for. I will definitely be looking out for Pathfinder, though, and if there is more poison support in the future. One thing I will say is that there is a new stat that's called Magnitude of Poison. I think these are outdated with effect. Magnitude of Poison, you can basically think of damage over time multiplier in Path of Exile 1, or basically just another more multiplier, right? So if you have 100% effect of poison or magnitude of poison, you just do double poison damage. Now, you could also not stack poisons and go low tolerance for a 1 poison build, where you just poison once and then you chill. But the payoff so far seems pretty low. There's no medium clusters like there were in Path of Exile 1, where you could just stack a bunch of low tolerance. Now, there's only this one payoff, at least as we know so far. So poison, for me, personally, is a complete question mark until we know the itemization and the full ascendancies. Totems. We don't know a lot about it. One thing we do know is they nerfed Ancestral Bond. This used to be 50 spirit, but apparently now it changed to 100. Now, Ancestral Bond is utter garbage as it is currently, simply because you have to spend 200 spirit to get your first +1 totem, because it doesn't say every additional totem, it says every totem. So even the one that you would have anyways reserves 100 spirit. This is abysmal. You're losing so many opportunities with meta gems, with certain auras that you cannot use just because of it. However, Dreamcore in this video did actually mention that there are nodes on the tree that give you +1 to attack totems. So that will probably make up for it. But just forget Ancestral Bond exists until we know more about maybe Templar or something, or we get a spell totem support. So currently, other than Warbringer, I don't have too much faith in totems, but for all we know, this Ancestral Spirit might be really good. Maybe it scales the same way as the totems. Maybe you don't actually need minion damage. We're gonna have to see. With some of the more general stuff out of the way, let's look at some of the passives that I think will be very strong, or potentially strong for very niche builds. 20% more damage against heavy stunned enemies with maces just seems incredible, but we'll have to see first if maces are actually gonna be the two-hander of choice, because that very much depends on the other passive nodes and how good the base types actually are. But in general, it looks really, really strong. Lay Siege, this is basically a payoff for being blocked, so that means if you have 100% block, 100% increased damage is super, super efficient, so that gives you back some of the investment that you had to take for the block. Just probably gonna be a no-brainer for a lot of builds. Also makes two-hander plus shield a lot more interesting than dual-wielding two-handers. We have Levitation, unaffected by enemy ground effects for 1 second after stepping on them. This could be potentially broken unless there's an internal cooldown that we don't know about. Think about it. You're kind of in a boss arena. There's like parts where there's dot ground, parts where there isn't. You step on it, you step off. You step on it, and you just never take damage because it's for 1 second, but if you step off it, it refreshes the... I don't know if that's actually going to work, but it's pretty big. Another thing to point out is there are actually +1 to level of certain skills. For example, Chaos, we've also seen Cold, so I'm assuming the same goes for Fire and Lightning. Then we have 35% chance for trigger skills to refund half of energy spent. So that means on average, for trigger, you get 17.5% of your energy back, which is basically this meter that fills up, and then once it's full, you trigger again. So it's going to make triggers easier. We don't exactly know how easy it will be to fulfill those conditions and how many you're going to be able to use. So completely depends on it, but I'm sure that if you use 2 or 3 triggers, this could be just a no-brainer. One with the Storm, quarterstaff skills that consume power charges, or count as consuming an additional one. I'm pretty sure they want to make these skills really strong, these like combo-ish skills. They know how clunky it is to set them up, so this is probably going to be really, really good. Just to note here, I do not think this works if you don't consume power charges, because some people have said that you're not going from 0 to 1. You would just go from 1 to 2. Then we have a lot of pen support, and you might be surprised by this, but you need to understand that pen doesn't go below 0 anymore. So pen is mostly something you spec in for bosses and high-res enemies, which is still worth it. If an enemy has 50% resistances, right, and you bring it all the way down to 0, that is double damage to it. So with how efficient these nodes are, I will assume that at least 4 to 6 or maybe 4 to 8 points of your damage will actually be allocated in these penetration nodes. Maybe less, we'll have to see, but you don't want to ever face a boss with 70 res and only have like 20 pen or something. That is not going to be a thing most likely. Whispers of Doom is very interesting, mostly because of how broken Blasphemy looks like right now. Now, if you don't know, this is Blasphemy right now. It's basically you reserve 30 spirit, which is like nothing, per curse. It sounds way too strong. You take Whispers of Doom, you get 1 additional curse, and you already have 2. So you go Temporal Chains and Feeble, you like have a super strong defensive setup for 60 spirit. It's almost too good to be true, so I will believe it when I see it. Then we have Psychic Fragmentation, which on average is 1 additional proc, 48% chance for that. So it's like a half of projectile, kind of notable, which is still extremely strong. As far as we know, most or maybe even all projectile skills do shotgun in this game. That is why you see a lot less access to it and a lot more punishing things. There's no GMP anymore. Lesser multiple projectile support has a way higher downside. Deadeye only gives you +1 projectile instead of +2. So I will assume this is just going to be an absolute no-brainer for projectile spell skills. Then we have Adamant Recovery and Ancient Aegis, and these really want me to go Armor, Energy Shield. Usually Evasion has better synergy because you're not getting hit as much, so your recovery starts easier. But Adamant Recovery, 40% of your armor also counts towards your recharge rate, which means if you have 200% armor, which seems pretty easy to get this patch, you're gonna get 80% recharge. It could get even crazier and crazier with itemization. So this is potentially an absolute game changer. Aegis, I'm not 100% sure yet, simply because enemies seem to chunk more and there's less hordes of monsters that just do small hits to you. But if you're already like going for Armor, Energy Shield, it's probably just a no-brainer. Then we have Unnatural Resilience, which is quite interesting. We don't have Righteous Fire right now, so we don't really know what this will do. We don't know if there's going to be full conversion, for example, where you just go full maximum fire res and then you convert all the other damage types to it. We don't know, so this could be broken, it could be worthless, we'll have to see. Shrapnel, chance to pierce enemy, projectiles have a chance to chain from terrain for any, like, I'm pretty sure this is going to be an anoint for a lot of spellcasters up on top, because it does not specify attacks. That is going to be my personal prediction. Force of Nature, more pen, seems very easily accessible. This is the only node that I've seen so far with Ailment Threshold, which we don't really know what that's about. There doesn't seem to be any ailment immunity, so that might be quite spicy for Energy Shield builds. Blade Catcher seems bonkers. Defend with 200% of armor against crits and strength. 15 strength is nothing to scoff at. That is 3 traveling nodes, and then you're getting 200% armor whenever you need it the most. Seems like a no-brainer to me. Pain Attunement, I want to point out that this now counts for everything. It's not just for spells. So if you are on low life, you get 30% more crit damage, which also counts for attacks. So that might open some doors. And then the last two, Core of the Guardian, gonna depend on how strong shields are, but 100% just seems kind of busted in terms of numericals for any build, really, if you're there on the passive tree. And then Emboldened Avatar. This will really depend on how easy it is to get Electrocute. We have already seen unique gloves that enable you to get Electrocute, but per default, you actually don't get it. So that's an interesting one. Chance to shock, freeze buildup, just very efficient. And yeah, there's a lot more nodes where this came from. Once again, link will be down below in the description. There's a lot of just general damage, attack speed, accuracy, stuff like that. Nothing really to write home about. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Just a lot of me rambling. But yeah, passive tree is one thing where I'm really looking forward to finally get my hands on it. Really hoping that we get Ascendancies before the reveal. I know a lot of people don't want to get like spoilered and they don't want to get Dynamite. I totally get that. But when it comes to Ascendancies, I really want to know. Simply because, especially since you cannot change the Ascendancy anymore, which they confirmed in Path of Exile 2, I just want to know what I get into. I don't want to like reroll at level 40 and find out what my nodes are there. That's the only thing where I'm like, I want to get spoilered. Everything else, I totally get it. But yeah, with that said, I'm online every day over on twitch.tv/Palsteron. So if you want to check that out, link will be down in the description as well. And yeah, that's about it. Because I still don't have a slogan. See you next time.